Anti-Americanism in Canada really is something else. Growing up, the sort of anti-American sentiments that I was exposed to would be, of course, if they were directed towards any other group, considered very discriminatory. I remember, as a child, very sincerely disliking Americans. I seriously just did not like them. And the reasons were always pretty clear. It was because Americans were violent, or they were discriminatory themselves, or they were some other left-wing trope of what conservatives were. Because, though I certainly did not understand the terms at the time, essentially what I was being fed was America's bad because America is conservative, though, of course, a caricature of conservatism. This is something that I eventually woke up to, and it basically corresponded with my awakening to politics. I essentially became a boomer-con, even worse, an American-style boomer-con. It was a classic turning on the head of the indoctrination that you get as a youth. You get some sort of ham-fisted indoctrination, so you decide to accept the opposing beliefs. But that's a bit off topic. I'm not here to talk about my cringe boomer-con years when I was 14. The anti-Americanism that I was indoctrinated into was usually based on some sort of comparison between Canada and the United States. Canada loved everyone, Americans hated people. Canada was peaceful, America was violent. Those types of things. And of course, one of the greatest examples was Canada had free healthcare and Americans did not. But the only possible example that could rival that, our free healthcare, was that Canada was multicultural and America was not. They were a racist melting pot. Canada allowed people to be who they were, while America tried to force people into a small box. Now, like so many aspects of the anti-Americanism that I was raised on, this is just a distortion of the facts. This melting pot might have existed at some point, but by the time I was born, never mind the time I was in school, it had long been gone. These sorts of left-wing narratives only really work if there is a boogeyman to look at and to say that we might be enlightened here, we might be the rebels here that are doing the good thing, but there's this boogeyman who's doing all the bad things, and in Canada, America served that role very well. The reality now that I of course understand is that multiculturalism is not some sort of cool rebel opinion. Multiculturalism is the state ideology for every single Western country. What we're told to believe is a small rebel faction is really the entire establishment. But okay, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling. What's the point? Yes, I think we all know at this point that the left lies, the left pretends to be the underdog when they're really the overdog. This should be pretty obvious, I think, though occasionally you get a new person wandering in who it's useful to remind about these things. The point is, I would like to take a look at this multiculturalism thing and see what exactly is the problem with it, and what really is this ideology all about. Now, this might seem like a bit of a strange question. What is multiculturalism? Well, multiculturalism is having multiple cultures, and at least celebrating multiple cultures. But that's actually an incredibly insufficient definition. If multiculturalism is just having multiple cultures, then the reality is all societies ever have always been multicultural. Even some of the most homogenous societies that we can think of are probably multicultural. Canada, for example, has clearly always had at least 3 major cultural groups: the English, the French, and the natives. However, it goes even deeper than that. You can just look at, for example, the old Canadian red ensign, the old national flag, and you'll see that it has 4 different national symbols on it: the symbol of the French, the Scottish, the English, and the Irish. All of those ethnic groups certainly contributed to Canada in very meaningful ways. And though in the past, at least, you certainly could speak of a broad Anglo-Canadian culture, there still were clear ethnic divides within those 3 different Anglo groups. And you also could not say that Anglo-Canadian culture was identical in each of the 10 provinces. Whether it's Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, the Anglo populations in all of those provinces clearly had distinct cultures to some extent or another. Again, even if you could probably talk about a broad overarching Anglo-Canadian culture. And of course, you find even more division if you go to the third of the 3 main groups that I mentioned earlier, that is, the natives. Because there clearly is no one single homogeneous group called the natives. There are just many different tribes with many different histories. Not only are the natives in, say, Ontario compared to, say, Alberta different, but even the natives within one province are different from each other and have different histories. Now, you could just say that Canada is a particularly extreme example of this, and that it has a lot more internal cultures than other places. And that might be true, but you can still see the same thing repeated in most, if not all, other countries. For example, if you look at Germany, clearly the culture in Brandenburg is not the same as the culture in Bavaria. Both of these places developed as separate states, and they had very different histories from each other, and they to this day have divergent cultures. But, okay, I know, that's all really rambly. What's my point with all that? My point with all that is leftists will very commonly assert that all nations are actually multicultural, that England has always been multicultural, France has always been multicultural, Germany has always been multicultural. All these nations, they've always actually been multicultural if you really think about it. Because you can do that same thing that I just did. You can go through all these countries, and you can find that there are quite clear different cultural groups that have existed within one nation. This is just identifying the basic historical fact that countries tend to have multiple different cultures within them to some extent or another. The degree of variance between those cultures can differ. Sometimes it's quite broad, sometimes it's quite narrow, but there still tends to be different cultures to some extent. So, that is all quite true, but a leftist is wrong to assert that that is multiculturalism. That is simply having multiple cultures. And despite those words sounding quite similar, those are not at all the same thing. So, what exactly is multiculturalism, then, if it isn't just having multiple cultures? Multiculturalism is the belief that all cultures should essentially be treated equivalently within a particular state, and that none should be given any sort of special privileged positions. Cultures that arrived just yesterday are given the same exact position as cultures that have been there for hundreds of years. Yes, there are always many cultures within any given area, depending on how exactly you choose to divide it up, but there's some sort of logical limit to how much you can divide that up. However, under multiculturalism, there is no limit, or at least that limit is basically the world's entire population. The goal is not to try to unify people with one specific culture or with a set of a few cultures. The goal is to have as many cultures as possible, to have infinite division going down and down. It's just cultures all the way down. The real result is, of course, the destruction of authentic cultures, that is, things that actually have taken centuries, if not thousands of years to build up, and the replacement with artificial corporate cultures. Because as the old Incredibles line goes, when everyone has a culture, no one does. The whole system, the whole ideology, is of course, on the face of it, absurd. Going from the obvious basic statement of fact that people in North Germany do not have identical culture and practices to people in South Germany, going from that basic statement to saying that then that means that introducing Han Chinese culture is basically the same difference, is just absurd. There's no reason anyone should possibly take such an assertion with any degree of seriousness. Like so many things from the left, this is just a cheap ploy, a cheap trick of a little bit of language. They are just obscuring what is obvious. Of course, the even greater irony is that if you actually value the different cultures throughout the world, allowing them to develop by themselves is precisely how you have multiculturalism, or at least how you have multiple cultures throughout the world. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this content, please donate to my Subscribestar or Patreon, and please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and share these videos with anyone who you think might find them interesting. And a special thanks to my donors, Emmett Vestry, Lita, Seth Apex, King of Evil Florida and the Moon, Josiah, Adzutko, Haxorius, Quo Pregranator, and Charismatic Byzantine. Thank you everyone for watching, and goodbye.